Hi, sixth graders. This lesson is on percents and decimals, so title your page appropriately. Our learning target is being able to write percentages as decimals, being able to write percentages with fractions as decimals, and then writing decimals as percents. So as we've talked about fractions and decimals and percents already, let's think about percents and what they represent. Remember, percents are part of a whole, so less than 100% is part of something. 100% would be the whole. So if we want to write percents as a decimal, let's look at 7%. We have two different ways that we can write 7% as a decimal. First, our method 1. So why don't you write this, writing percents as decimals, and then write 7% as a decimal. Draw a line down the middle so you can have an example of both methods. So if we write it as a fraction, remember 7% is the same as 7 over 100. 7/100 is going to be 0.07. If there's nothing before the decimal, we always want to make sure we have a 0. 7/100, the 7 is going to be in the hundredth spot because it's over 100, so it'd be 7/100. Method 2 is a little bit simpler and a little bit quicker. Move the decimal 2 places to the left. So I start at 7%. There's no decimal that is visible to see, but we know that there's an invisible decimal right here because 7 is the same as 7.0. So then I add a decimal, I move it 2 to the left. I have to fill in a 0 right here for that place. And then I add my 0 before my decimal and I get 0.07. Notice how they match up. And then also one thing I want to note here is that when we divide by 100, that's actually what we're doing. We're moving the decimal place 2 to the left. So going over 2 to the left is the same as dividing by 100, which right here, we know that one way of figuring out 7/100 into a decimal would be 7 divided by 100, and our decimal then would move over 2 to the left. So you go ahead and try these on your own, and then come back and check to see if your answers are correct. So 54% is the same as 54/100, which would be 54/100 written like that. Or 54%, I'm going to add my decimal right after the 4, go over to the left 2, add that 0 before the decimal, and I get 54/100, 0.54. 0.4%, so 0.4% is less than 1%. It's a very, very, very small percent. So that means that my decimal is also going to be very, very small. So I already have a decimal in my percent, so I'm going to go over to the left 2, leave a spot there to add a 0. So my answer is going to be 0.004. And then 84.2%, take this decimal, go to the left 2, always add a 0 before the decimal if there's not one, so 0.842. So what happens when we have a fraction inside a percent? So Alaska is the largest state, making up about 16 1/10% of the land area of the U.S. Write this amount as a decimal. So first of all, 16 1/10% is what we have. So it's kind of weird, we have a fraction within a percent. So we first want to write 16 1/10 as a decimal. So 16 1/10 is going to be 16 point something. 1/10 would just be then 0.1 because this 1 is in the tens place. So 16 1/10% is the same as 16.1%. Then if we want to write it as a decimal, there's a decimal within the percent. So right now the form that it's in is in a percent. It's not in decimal form even though there's a decimal. So then I take my decimal and I go to the left 2. And I end up with 0.161. That's my decimal. that is equivalent to 16 and 1/10%. So first you need to change it to a decimal within the percent, and then you change it to a decimal. You try these two on your own and then come back and check your work. So we have about 6 4/5% of the U.S. is water. What decimal represents this amount? So 6 4/5% is the same as 6 point, and then let's do 4/5 right here and change it to a decimal. So I know 5 can go into 10, so I'm just going to change it to tenths, which is going to be 8/10, because remember how if I multiply times 2 on the bottom, I have to do that on the top. So 8/10 is the same as 0.8, because remember 8/10, and this is 8 in the tenths place. So 6 4/5 is going to be the same as 6.8%. Then I change it to a decimal, so I go over to the left 2. There's a place that I have to add a 0, so it's going to be 0.068. That's how much of the U.S. is water. The total area of Australia is 38 11/20%. So 38 11/20% is the same as 38 point something percent. All we're doing is changing our 11/20 to a decimal right now to keep it in percent form. So 11/20 is going to be the same as, because I can times them both by 5 to get hundredths in the bottom. So 55 hundredths would be the same as 38.55. Then we move our decimal 2 to the left, so it would be 0.3855. When we want to write a decimal as a percent, so you label this in your notebook now so you know that we're changing from decimals to percents. Write 0.4 as a decimal, draw your lines so you can have an example of both methods. We're doing the opposite. So 0.4 as a decimal, so 4/10, we're going to write it as a fraction. 4/10, that's the same as 0.4. And then to convert it to a percent, we need to get 100 on the bottom. So it'd be 40 hundredths, which is 40%. Or we can do the opposite. We can move the decimal place 2 places to the right. So if I have 0.4, I go 1, 2. But I have to make sure that I move over 2 and add a 0 here. So that's going to be 40, because my new decimal is here. 40.0 or 40.0, which is just 40.
Do you want their work phone number, cell phone number, or what do you?
This should be written. Sorry, this is a typo. It should say as a percent. Sorry, just noticing that. So then 40.0 is the same as 40%. And then we can see that they're matched up. You try these on your own. Write all the decimals as a percent, and then come back and check to make sure that you wrote them correctly. So 0.5, so remember decimal to a percent, we're moving the decimal 2 places to the right. So if I don't have 2 places to go, I'm still just going to carefully make 2 spots, add a 0 in there, so 0.5, as we probably know, is 50% because it's half, so 50%. 0.34, so I go 2 to the right, which leaves me with 34%. 0.09, 2 to the right, which ends at the 9. I can drop those zeros before, so that gives me 9%. And then each day Rio and his dog walk 0.625 miles. What percent of a mile do they walk? So I'm going to take this decimal, and it's going to end up right between the 2 and the 5 because I went over 2. So I have 62.5%. I'm going to keep that decimal with the 0.5 in my percent. All right, so take a screenshot of this, and also I want you to write this in your notebook. So this is something I want you to have. Percent to decimal Move the decimal point 2 places to the left. Decimal to percent. Move the decimal point 2 places to the right. You do these in your notebook underneath the notes that you just took, and then have them ready in class for us to go over together during the next class period. And that's all I have for you. Make sure you have your notes ready to go for your next class period. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.